Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
In the following weeks, the sudden ambush and subsequent retreat of Team Sigma was unnoticed by all. Whatever explanation or excuse was made for deaths of Akiyama Minoru and his families was completely overshadowed by the dramatic rise of civil unrest that plagued the nation. All throughout the Land of Fire, the civilian populace rose up in protest of one minor scandal to another. Junin military police officers were caught accepting bribes. Protest. Konoha shinobi collateral damage destroyed the crops of a farmer. Protest. Konoha shinobi were too slow in apprehending a pirate raid off the coast. Protest. The new levy hit small businesses, gathering monies for the restoration and repair of villages damaged during the Blitz. Protest. More often than not, they were minor affairs. Disgruntled citizens would gather at the nearest place of authority, shout a few things, and then disperse once Konoha's military police arrived to sort them out. Sometimes, it was easy to see the strings that were being played by the nobility, as both minor and major nobles used the rumbling discontent to their own advantage, playing citizens against other nobles, against the Fire Lord or against Konoha itself, purely for their own advantage. Even Konoha wasn't unaffected. There were mutterings from some of the shinobi. The civilian populace of Konoha was beginning to be viewed suspiciously, and the posters that sometimes appeared for an hour or so before abruptly vanishing did not help. The Fire Lord had called for calm, and for the most part it seemed to be working. There had been no more wild riots, and very few incidents of citizens acting violently towards the military police. When such a thing did occur, it was handled quickly and professionally, the person arrested and detained to await trial. Despite the lack of violence, the tension was there. Something was festering beneath the surface of the Land of Fire, and all it would take would be a single spark to set it off. As such, there were those who needed to ensure that they would be ready for the oncoming storm. Dodge. Naruto darted backwards, avoiding the barrage of shuriken that peppered the ground an instant later. Before he could regain his footing, a blur of movement appeared to his left, and he hastily fucked a kick, before bringing both arms up to block a hefty blow. The force behind it sent him sliding backwards, his sandals scraping against the ground. Even before he had stopped, Naruto had flipped through two hand seals and brought his hands up to his lips. He inhaled, reared his head back and spat out fire. It rose up, the air suddenly becoming hot, a giant, spiraling ball of flame 3 times his height surging forward. Despite the fierce power behind the technique, the blonde Anbu knew that the technique would not connect. Nonetheless, he hadn't used it with the intention of wounding his opponent, and between the raging fires, the smoke and heat, Naruto was able to escape using the body replacement. It was a good escape, and one performed just in time. A few moments later, the perfect sphere of flames was gutted and its form collapsed, a giant, writhing mass of flame falling upon the ground, grass and shrubs catching alight. A loud pitch whine filled the air as 2 streaks of water burst through the flames and caught the log that Naruto had replaced himself with dead on. They high-pressurized bullets of water pulverized the wood, smashing it into splinters. From his new position on one of the many trees that surrounded the clearing, Naruto watched on. He was panting, his brow sweaty, and his limbs shaky. Fighting against such opponent was tiring. Nonetheless, blind stubbornness kept him going on. Lightning release. Electromagnetic murder. He slapped his hand on the branch as he channeled lightning chakra through his fingertips. Wood creaked and groaned as a furious discharge of surging bolts tore through it, racing towards the ground. It left the base of the tree in a surge, tearing apart the earth and shattering stone as it roared towards the fiery mess in the center of the clearing. A large figure was casually lumbering out of it, and the lightning screeched as it smashed upon a hefty, spiked shield. A large toad stood there, unconcerned with the fire around it. 4 times as tall as Naruto, its horizontal slatted eyes appearing unconcerned, it was lumbered on forward, batting away the lightning release technique with its bone-like shield as easily as one would swat a fly. Jiraiya sat on top of it, giggling and blushing as he pored over some kind of magazine, his left hand holding it up and his right hand taking notes on a small, spiral-bound notepad. The toad's hind legs tensed, and Naruto's eyes widened. He darted to the right, using a nearby tree branch to launch himself away from where he had been standing. The large toad smashed onto the tree, its webbed hand coming down and slicing through the trunk like it was paper. Naruto smiled grimly as he landed on another tree, his right hand up and making a single hand seal. Detonate. The explosive tags that he had left on the tree began to glow and crackle. In a second, they would explode right around the toad. It would be a second too late. With a surge of speed, the toad grabbed the cracked and falling tree branch that Naruto had laid his explosive tags on and hurled it straight at him. Naruto's eyes widened as the branch came towards him, the explosive tags primed and just about to explode. He had an instant to react, or to escape, and he quickly reversed the hand seal. Dispel. The tags glowed and exploded, but instead of the great gouts of fire only smoke came from them. Naruto felt a measure of relief that he had managed to disable the tags. Then he was hit in the face with a branch. His mask took the brunt of the attack, but it still sent him flying from the tree and he landed on the ground roughly, bouncing once or twice before stopping. The giant toad landed above him, its shield raised above its head, poised to slam down on him. His back aching, Naruto gritted his teeth and slammed his hand down on the ground. Earth release, earth flow river. The ground beneath the toad liquefied and began to flow like a river. The current caused the toad to stumble and the shield missed him by meters, slamming into the ground next to him. On his back, Naruto flipped through some more signs and slammed his palms on the ground. Summoning technique, arise, Titan. The ground rumbled even as the toad regained its footing, and suddenly Naruto was forced up into the air as a mountain of rock beneath him tore its way free from the ground. Two large hands emerged first, covered in thick, oozing tar, with veins of fire. Then came the upper chest, reinforced by thick slabs of granite, thick goblets of molten rock dropping from the crevices in the stone. Finally, the head came last, a human skull made of stone with a leering, frozen smile of razor-sharp teeth and two eye sockets filled with flame. On top of that head stood Naruto, his hands twisted in a single hand seal and his face scrunched up with an intense look of concentration. His cracked mask dangled from his belt, and his dirty and muddy cloak flapped about him. The Titan rose to the toad's height, steam rising from its very form as the moisture in the soil and air evaporated almost instantly. On top of the toad, Jiraiya had stopped poring over his book and regarded the construct in front of him with narrowed eyes. Naruto could see him stroking his chin, and talking quietly to his own mount. The toad nodded and dashed forward, closing the distance in two huge leaps and bringing its shield down upon the construct of earth and fire with tremendous force. The Titan's left arm rose and it blocked the blow but just barely. The shield smashed into the rock and chipped off a huge chunk of the forearm, lodging itself halfway through the arm of the Titan. Blood, of red-hot magma dripped from the wound and the toad recoiled, yanking its shield futilely. The Titan raised its right hand and reared back, delivering a slow but mighty blow. The toad copped it right on the head, and while the momentum of the punch sent it flying backwards, it also allowed the toad to wrench the shield out of the Titan's arm. Naruto made a single hand seal, his smile grim. Fire release, Titan's roar. The Titan's mouth glowed with an ominous red light, and then from it came a huge gout of flame that made Naruto's previous fire release techniques look like the light of a candle. The toad, still dazed by the blow, watched on helplessly but then Jiraiya made a move. The Sannin flipped through some hand seals and a giant slab of earth rose up in front of the toad. It had been positioned in such a way that made it divert the gout of flame rather than outright block it, and while the Titan's roar did envelop a large part of the forest with fire, it left Jiraiya and his summon untouched. Naruto was panting, glaring. I think that's enough. Jiraiya's voice called over the distance. He patted his summon on the head, murmured something to it and then watched as the large toad disappeared with a puff of smoke. His veins burning with chakra, his adrenaline raging, Naruto wanted to keep the battle going. Nonetheless, he slapped his hand on the Titan and the fires within it died down. The glow of light disappeared from the Titan's eyes and it began to crumble, massive slabs of earth falling apart and turning into soil and earth. Almost 5 seconds later, only a mound of slightly warm earth stood where the massive construct had been, and Naruto moved down to join Jiraiya back in the clearing. The fires that Naruto had originally started had almost gone out with very little damage, which was understandable. Fires created with chakra very rarely lasted longer than a few minutes, needing fuel, oxygen and more chakra to sustain itself, while the plants in Training Ground 1 had been created by the first Hokage himself, and were able to withstand much more than the usual forest. The young blonde flopped down onto the ground with a sigh as Jiraiya chuckled, coming to sit down cross-legged next to the Anbu captain. You're getting good with that thing, he remarked, ruffling Naruto's hair despite the youngster's muttered protests. If you could finally get it to walk, you'd be able to counter most of the summons out there. I know, Naruto muttered. He was scowling. Despite his best attempts, his progress with the Titan summoning technique had stalled. He could only make it about 6 meters tall before it collapsed in on itself. While it was an impressive construct, its lack of mobility was a severe disadvantage in a real fight. Naruto had only mastered the one long-distance attack, which could be easily blocked, and the Titan still couldn't turn very well, which meant that flanking maneuvers were definitely a weakness. Combined with Naruto's inability to use other techniques with most of his attention focused on the Titan, the construct, while appearing formidable, had a number of weaknesses that Naruto needed to fix. Cheer up, Jiraiya said cheerfully, knocking Naruto out of his critical thinking with a gentle clap on the back. Here, have this. He held out a flavored ice block. Naruto looked at the proffered treat with a raised eyebrow, but he nonetheless took it. Thanks, he said quietly. Jiraiya smiled and mussed up Naruto's hair, smiling as the boy swatted at his hands ineffectively. There was a moment of peace between them as the two of them sat there quietly, eating away at their frozen treats. Jiraiya finished first, licking his lips and letting out a huge breath. Anyway, now that we're finished sparring, Jiraiya began, and he turned to Naruto with a mischievous smile. Did you wanna see something cool? Naruto's eyebrows rose. Something cool. He nodded silently, even as he thought about what that could mean. Despite his eccentricities, Jiraiya was a Sannin, and his knowledge, power and skill were right up there with the third Hokage. Was it going to be an earth technique? Maybe a fire technique? Perhaps the vaunted Toad Sage abilities that Naruto had only ever heard whispers of. Jiraiya grinned and slammed his hands down on the ground. A second later, there was a flash of smoke and a small, red toad appeared. It eyed Jiraiya with what seemed like reproach but nonetheless allowed the Toad Sage to pick it up and place it on his lap. This is a technique that allows me to see through the eyes of my summon, Jiraiya murmured as he stroked the toad's back. Put your hand here. Fascinated, Naruto placed a hand on the toad. He winced as his vision wavered and went fuzzy, and suddenly he was looking at two different sets of images in his mind. It was hard to differentiate between them as the images overlapped with each other, but Naruto carefully tried to analyze them each in turn. One set of images was from where he was sitting, of dirt and grass and a smiling toad sage. The other set was that steam, a wooden fence, and small shrubs. Something wet water, and was that somebody coming? Fabric was dropped and Naruto caught a flash of bare flesh. He jerked back, horrified, his cheeks flushing and his mouth flopping up and down as he temporarily lost the ability to form words. Jiraiya roared with laughter. What the hell? Naruto spluttered. His cheeks felt warm, and he felt tremendously embarrassed and mortified yet strangely fascinated nonetheless. What the hell was that? That was my research, Jiraiya grinned. He gestured at the front invitingly. Come on, have another look. Nobody will ever know. Naruto stared at him, horrified. This is really creepy, he muttered. Nonetheless, he shuffled back closer to the Toad Sage, his cheeks red, and he tentatively reached out for the toad. Just as his fingers grazed the summon's back, it promptly disappeared in a flash of smoke and a mournful korak. Soon it found the other one, Jiraiya murmured. He gave an uneasy smile and jumped hastily to his feet. So, looks like I need to check out something. See you later, Naruto. He promptly disappeared in a flicker of movement that Naruto was barely able to see. He sat there, his cheeks slowly regaining their normal color, staring at the back of the retreating Sannin. Naruto sighed, rubbing the back of his head, still feeling quite confused. He finished off his ice block, and was just about to get up and begin training again when a terrible presence bore down on him. He whirled around, his heart racing, as something incredibly powerful approached him. It was full of righteous anger and terrible wrath, and was horrifyingly familiar. Naruto just sighed in resignation and turned away. An instant later, Tsunade landed in the training ground, her form wreathed with golden fire, her fists clenched and the veins in her forehead throbbing. Before she could say anything, Naruto pointed to the left. He went that way, he proclaimed dully. Tsunade scoffed as she followed his finger. She seemed to making some calculations in her head, and the conclusions she reached made her tremble in anger. That slippery little bastard, she growled. Her fists clenched and the golden fire around her became even more pronounced, but then she sighed and it faded away. She turned to Naruto, regarding him with suspicious eyes. Hey, brat. Didn't I feel your chakra as well? Naruto's mouth opened and the lie that came out was so smooth that he almost half believed it himself. No, he said flawlessly. I was training here, so maybe some of my chakra caused some interference or something. I wasn't doing anything. Tsunade cocked her head, considering him carefully. Then she gave him a vicious smile, looking down at him. So you didn't see anything? Naruto paused, his eyes unconsciously lowering to her cleavage, and his cheeks gave the slightest flush. Tsunade twitched, her fingers giving a little spasm, and she chuckled hoarsely. Doing some training, huh? She practically purred, stalking towards him like a hunter towards its prey. Naruto backed away uneasily, gulping. Well, if my good-for-nothing teammate has the time to help you out, maybe I should as well, Tsunade continued, smiling dangerously as she moved closer and closer to Naruto. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly, Naruto began hastily. I insist, Tsunade interrupted, rubbing her hands with something that looked like malicious glee. I have a great exercise for you. Let's play a game, Naruto. What type of game? Naruto asked, already feeling like he was going to regret the answer. Ever heard of a game called dodgeball? Yeah, Naruto answered slowly, eyes wide. Tsunade smiled, raised her foot and stomped on the ground. It shuddered and rumbled, a fissure appearing where her heel had struck the ground, and Naruto watched with wide eyes as a jagged rock twice as large as he shot out of the ground. The legendary Sannin caught it effortlessly, holding it in one hand, leering down at Naruto with a truly dangerous expression. It's like that, she said sweetly. Except I use this. I call it, Dodge Rock. Naruto stared at the boulder and gulped. Fuck, he uttered morosely. Oi, Naruto, Tsunade called out, a wicked smile on her face. She drew back her arm, her golden eyes flashing. Dodge. Ow. Wait, no, don't Naruto winced as Tsunade ruthlessly pulled out yet another splinter from his back, not seeming to care about his feeble protests one bit. The game had gone on for about 15 minutes, and in the end it had left Naruto utterly exhausted and trembling, his clothes in tatters, his armor heavily dented and his supply of kunai and shuriken turned into scrap. Tsunade had thrown pretty everything at him except the kitchen sink, and if Training Ground 1 had possessed a kitchen, she would have chucked that at him as well. From boulders, she had moved on to branches, then entire trees, swinging them around with the ease as one might swing a fly swatter to kill a bug. Nothing Naruto had pulled out seemed to have stopped her. She had even backhanded his titan into 1,000 pieces and thrown its rapidly crumbling head at him with enough force to leave a large crater in the side of the cavern. Whoever said Tsunade was a close combat specialist had never seen her throw a rock the size of a house a good 100 meters. In the end, Naruto had ended up pinned underneath said rock, unable to move his limbs as Tsunade towered over him. She had smiled down sweetly at him and asked if the view had been worth all of this effort. Privately, Naruto thought that it rather had. At least the Sannin had been courteous enough to drag him to the hospital, and she had even started patching him up. It was pleasant, mind you, but no other doctor would have gone near him, so he was just grateful that somebody was tending to his wounds. Tsunade had made her status as his personal physician quite clear, and nobody in the hospital seemed suicidal enough to contradict her. There, almost done, Tsunade said briskly. She ran her glowing hands over his arms, and some of the tension and aches immediately faded as she worked on his forearms. Tell you what, kid, you can take a hit. Practice, I think, Naruto responded dryly. Tsunade snorted as she continued to run her glowing hands on him. Her deft finger touches left goosebumps on his arms, and he practically sighed in relief as she worked out a kink from his shoulder. It would have healed sooner than later, probably in an hour or so, but there was nothing quite like a medical technique to speed things along. Anyway, Tsunade said as she moved behind him. Naruto heard a rustle and the sound of tearing fabric. What's this I hear about Team Sigma getting a larger roster? We added a new member, Naruto answered. Uchiha Sasuke. He's been working Gar. That's cold. Tsunade ignored him and kept applying the paste to his lacerations. Naruto could feel that some of them were quite deep, but there was really no need to put antibacterial cream on it. He told the medic that, and she snorted. I don't care if you can grow back your limbs, she snorted. I'm your doctor, so you'll do as I say. Whatever, Naruto muttered sourly. Tsunade continued on, unconcerned with his darkening mood. One of the Uchiha in Sigma, she mused quietly. To think that a member of that clan would be in the squad that acts as the Hokage's personal bodyguards. My uncle would be spinning in his grave. He's a good shinobi, Naruto said defensively. His fists clenched. Don't trash my squad, you old Haga. Tsunade applied the next patch with a little bit more pressure than what was necessary. Watch your mouth, you little punk, she growled, squeezing his shoulder until something creaked. Naruto turned and glared at her defiantly. She glared back, golden brown meeting his crystal blue, and then her lips twitched. She sighed and dropped the stare, continuing to wrap a bandage around his shoulder. You're a brave, little brat, aren't you? She asked. There was a note of something in her voice that Naruto couldn't recognize. After a moment, she kept talking, and her voice had softened considerably. So you get along with all of your teammates? Naruto nodded. They threw me a birthday party the other day, he said. He smiled at the memory of it, and leaned in closer to Tsunade. I got presents, he confessed. He sounded quite pleased with himself. Tsunade's mouth was slightly open, and she shook her head and smiled softly at him. That's good, she replied. Anything good? Naruto nodded. 4 sets of kunai, a spool of wire the conductive type, really expensive and not on my equipment list, so I have to buy it myself. What else? I got a new whetstone, a pack of barbed senbon, 4 smoke bombs, and a teddy bear. He paused. I think Toa was just trying to stuff around, but I like it. You have a teddy bear? Tsunade asked with surprise. Yep, Naruto nodded. He slammed his fist in his palm. We made some modifications, replaced the eyes with a makeshift senbon launcher and stuffed a smoke bomb in its chest. Then we hooked up some wire, and when I got back to the tower I attached it to the door frame. If Konohamaru comes sneaking in, he's gonna get 20 senbon shoved right up his RGHH. Tsunade had finished tightening the bandage with an exasperated expression on her face. She shook her head wryly. Boys, she murmured fondly. She reached behind her and chucked Naruto a bottled drink that she had somehow hidden in her medical bag. Drink up. Naruto took the tonic and took a deep gulp. He shuddered. The vitamin and nutrients might have been essential to a growing boy's needs or whatever, but it tasted truly bad. Couldn't they have added a little bit of sugar to it? Tsunade was watching him, and as he put down the nearly empty bottle, she reached over and ruffled his hair. Gah, why is it always the hair? Naruto despaired, trying to shield himself from the older woman. You, Tsunade proclaimed fondly, are a weird kid. Her hand drifted to his chest, where the first Hokage's pendant sat. He had never really taken it off since the time he had acquired it off of her, and Naruto sometimes honestly forgot that he still had it on. Now that it was in the presence of a senju, he could feel something within it stir and resonate with Tsunade's touch. The Sannin's fingers ghosted over the priceless jewel. Dan would have liked you, she murmured. Naruto didn't know what to say to that. Then, she withdrew her hand and scoffed. Nawaki though, she said sternly, would have hated you. He'd have kicked your ass. He could have tried, Naruto muttered. Tsunade let out a single laugh and folded her arms over her chest. He was a fast little shit, she mused. Faster than any genin I've ever seen, although there's that one taijutsu genin that comes closer than any others. Come to think of it, and here she eyed him critically, you've gotten a lot faster since our last spar as well. That had been a spar. Naruto vaguely recalled that the spar had left an entire forest devastated and Team Sigma mentally traumatized as Tsunade had picked them apart with her immense strength. He smiled weakly. I'm just awesome, he proclaimed somewhat hesitantly. Or so Yuka keeps telling me. Oh, Tsunade raised an eyebrow, suddenly looking interested. Who's Yuka? A teammate, Naruto answered, looking at Tsunade strangely. A girl teammate. Tsunade pressed. Yeah, Naruto drawled, nodding slowly. He cocked his head. Is that a problem? Oh, no, Tsunade shook her head, her smile becoming predatory. There's no problem, Naruto, but do tell. Tell what? Naruto replied blankly. Is she beautiful? Tsunade asked, her eyes narrowing as she catalogued his every reaction. Naruto's mouth moved uselessly, and his cheeks flushed. I'm totally not having this conversation, he finally responded. He jumped up off of the hospital bed and pressed his Anbu tattoo. In a puff of smoke, Naruto's dented armor and tattered clothes were replaced with a pair of shorts and a white shirt. Have you had the talk yet? Tsunade mused. I wonder if I need to go over it with you. The talk, Naruto repeated carefully. You know, Tsunade gestured with her hands. When a man and a woman love each other, they. Oh, fuck no, Naruto swore, and he disappeared in a blazingly fast body flicker, leaving the Sannin behind to chuckle quietly to herself. Naruto would have liked to take the rest of the day off. He hadn't been rostered on for any missions, he had fulfilled his weekly training requirements in the last 2 days and he was still pretty exhausted from the rather intense confrontation with Tsunade. Regardless, the bird that soared past his head and dropped a white feather into his hand was rather insistent, and with a sign Naruto made a hand seal and disappeared in a flicker of movement. A few minutes later, Naruto appeared in the Hokage's tower. He had sealed away his casual clothes, and he wore his flak vest over a black shirt and a pair of pants. The blonde adjusted his headband so that it sat straight on his forehead, and then continued walking down the hallway. Members of the Jonin Guard nodded at him as he passed them, and Naruto waved back in a friendly greeting. It was only when he had passed the last of the checkpoints to the Hokage's office that he stopped, his eyes widening. A black-cloaked figure wearing a patterned white mask stood before him. Red stripes curled down the side of the man's mask to form an intimidating snarl. The Anbu operative was walking towards the Hokage's office, but he noticed Naruto's approach and paused. Good afternoon, Ferret, the man greeted coolly. Like the Anbu commander, his voice was partially synthesized, deep and unemotional. I have heard of Team Sigma's successes in the field. You are to be commended. Hello, Kitsune, Naruto greeted back just as coolly. I didn't know you were back. Kitsune gave a tiny shrug. Our mission in the land of hot springs is complete. As such, Alpha Platoon is reporting back to Konoha for reassignment. The two Anbu operatives fell into line with each other and began to walk towards the Hokage's office. Kitsune was taller than Naruto by a fair margin, and Naruto worked hard to keep his stride in line with the senior operative. Good mission, Naruto asked after a few awkward moments. We reached our objectives in a satisfactory manner, Kitsune replied. Oh, Naruto uttered. He scratched the back of his head. Awesome. The two Anbu operatives reached the doors and entered the Hokage's office. The third Hokage sat behind his desk, carefully studying one of the many documents that littered his table. Kitsune paused at the head of the Hokage's table and knelt, while Naruto moved past him to stand behind the Hokage's left shoulder. Rise, Kitsune, the Hokage said, his voice a rumble. Kitsune did so, and he stood there, tall, proud and unmoving, the perfect shinobi. Behind the Hokage, Naruto rolled his eyes. Damn it, Kitsune was such a suck-up. The other operative probably saw his eye roll, but nonetheless he stood there unflinchingly as the Hokage finished reading the document and placed it down on the table. Report, the Hokage commanded. As per your orders, Alpha Platoon entered the land of the hot springs and immediately began searching for any remnants of the cult of Jashin, Kitsune said. The Fire Lord was able to negotiate official clearance with the local feudal lord, and we began looking at their records. He paused. Despite severe losses sustained during the crusade against the Land of Lightning, the cult had managed to build up the numbers to dangerous levels. There were approximately 7 monasteries hidden away in remote regions, with approximately 3,000 members in total. We followed reports of disappearances and abductions and located 5 of the monasteries. As per your orders, we implemented the Scorched Earth Doctrine. Kitsune cocked his head. There was some collateral damage. Several of the cultists had integrated themselves into local villages. Many members of the minor nobility had been turned, some forcefully, using a brainwashing method still unknown to us. Their overall goals seemed to be once again the complete control of the feudal court. We tracked down every agent and member of the cult and neutralized them. Our last count indicated that 6,427 men, women and children were put to the torch. 15 villages were burned. All 7 monasteries were destroyed. All associated books and artifacts were gathered and destroyed. Naruto's eyes widened and it took all of his control not to gape at the other Anbu captain in the room. Alpha Platoon had killed over 6,000 people in a matter of months. What he was hearing made him feel uneasy, but he ruthlessly squashed down those feelings and reminded himself just exactly why Alpha Platoon had been deployed. After all, the cult of Jashin had invaded the Land of Fire, butchered hundreds of citizens and attempted an assassination of the daughter of the Fire Lord. Naruto clenched his fists. The cult, and anybody who had associated with them, had gotten exactly what they deserved, or, at least, that's what the blonde boy told himself. The Hokage nodded, looking unmoved by the statistics that he had just heard. And the status of your squad? He continued. Out of 25 Anbu operatives, 8 were killed in action, Kitsune reported in a monotone. The cult possessed some fearsome techniques involving the use of blood. Their largest monastery was protected by a barrier technique that liquefied the flesh of any individual within the radius of it. We lost a squad in our initial scouting attempts. I see, the Hokage murmured. I trust that you have documented this technique. Yes, Hokage-sama. Kitsune bowed. Very well, the Hokage said. He waved Kitsune away. Dismissed, Captain. You and your men have 2 weeks of leave. You have earned it. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Kitsune said. He bowed once more, and then disappeared. Naruto was left alone in the office with the Hokage, but the old man didn't seem like he was in the mood to talk. For the next couple of hours, the young blonde silently worked at Sarutobi's side, filing paperwork and sending of messengers. There were times when Sarutobi would just stare out the window with his pipe, letting Naruto handle much of the logistics by himself. It occurred to Naruto as he was stamping approval on a budget request that he had just approved the movement of more money than he would ever earn in a lifetime. It also occurred to him that he was technically committing treason at the moment as he used the Hokage's stamp to authorize yet another document. He finished it off by signing Sarutobi's name, his use of the signature practically identical to the old man's own. Towards the end of the day, when the sun was beginning to dip over the Hokage's monument, there was a knock on the door. Sarutobi stirred in his chair and looked up from his cup of tea. Naruto stood up from his seat and strode across the room to open the door. An old man stood there, heavily bandaged. His arm was close to his chest, held up by a sling, and one of his eyes was covered by his bandages. He held a cane in his hand, and he wore a faint and unassuming smile. Good evening, Uzumaki Naruto, Danzo greeted quietly. I have an appointment with the Hokage. Is he available? Naruto turned his head and saw Sarutobi give him a slight nod. He pulled on the door and held it open as the injured elder walked into the office, heavily favoring his left leg. The cane tapped rhythmically along the wooden floorboards as the old man limped to the desk and sank into one of the seats. You're dismissed, Naruto, the Hokage said quietly. He waved the young blonde away, despite the Anbu operative's half-formed protests. I can handle the rest of this myself. Thank you for your assistance today. Naruto nodded, and with one last, curious look at Danzo, left the office. The door closed with a quiet thud behind Naruto's departure, and it left Sarutobi Hiruzen and Shimura Danzo alone in the office. The god of shinobi and the darkness of shinobi sat on opposite ends of the table, the former puffing on his pipe. Danzo slowly reached into his robes and pulled out his own pipe. The Hokage raised an eyebrow as the other elder shinobi lit the end of the pipe with an expert flare of fire-natured chakra and puffed on it. Alpha Platoon is back, Danzo commented. Their presence will be well needed in the coming days. Indeed, Sarutobi responded. He took a sip from his cup of tea. It appears that conflict is inevitable, my old friend. One way or another, war is coming to the land of fire. Danzo made a noise in the back of his throat. How vexing, he murmured. To think that there's a squad of foreign operatives conducting missions on our own soil, his fist clenched against his pipe, and his nostrils flared. Sarutobi smiled ruefully. I am torn between anger and admiration, he admitted. Whoever is responsible is doing such a superb job. I am loath to admit, but they might even be better than your vaunted route. If it still existed, Danzo added a moment later. Sarutobi smiled. Of course, he agreed graciously. He rubbed at his chin with his thumb. On a more serious note, it's becoming quite apparent that we might need to start considering the worst-case scenario. Danzo paused. Should the village lose the support of the fire court, it might become necessary to appoint a Hokage who will be able to regain favor of the nobility, Sarutobi continued grimly. It cannot be I. The rumors of my involvement with the last Fire Lord's demise are poison to my position. Who will take the spot then? Danzo asked. Is your newest apprentice the one who will rise to the position? Sarutobi smiled bitterly. No, he rejected. Naruto is the right hand of God. His prestige is tied to his relationship to me. While he is beginning to make a name for himself, he is still perceived as being under my thumb. Sarutobi shook his head. No, Naruto becoming the 5th Hokage will not help fix this crisis. Besides, Danzo said, Uzumaki Naruto is still too inexperienced for the position. There are better shinobi for the job. Like yourself, Sarutobi noted with wry amusement. Danzo smiled thinly. I would be a possible candidate, he admitted. Nonetheless, I would not want the position in such circumstances. The kowtowing and bowing that would be required in such a state of affairs would force me to use drastic measures. I might just have to overthrow the fire court should such a thing happen. Sarutobi froze and pinned his rival with a terrible glare. That's not funny. Danzo was unaffected by the Hokage's displeasure. He seemed to be mulling something over. While it is commendable that you are considering all outcomes to our situation, I believe that you're focusing too much on our defeat and not enough on our victory. Sarutobi looked amused. Am I now? He asked. Do tell, Danzo. What are you thinking? Uzumaki is in your shadow, Danzo responded. He puffed on his pipe for a few moments. Like you said, his status is tied to your own. Use that then. Don't lose the battle. Use your Jinchuriki to your advantage. Force him to the front. Make him the public face of your campaign. Your victory will not only protect the status of the village, but it will allow Uzumaki to become acquainted with the Fire Lord and the nobility. They will know his worth, and they will remember it when the time comes. Sarutobi sighed. When the time comes, he mused to himself. How long? Danzo questioned. He seemed genuinely curious. I want to say tomorrow, Sarutobi murmured. He chuckled. Perhaps, though, if all goes well, then in 5 years I will be able to take off the hat. Naruto can pick it up when he is 18 and then the village will be his responsibility. Should it survive that long? Danzo murmured quietly. Sarutobi chuckled wearily. Should it survive that long? He agreed. Bloody Monday. It was the dawn of a new day, and the sun rose up into the sky, casting a soft, golden light upon the sleepy village of Konoha. Most of the businesses had shut for the night, and while there was always an active shinobi presence, the village seemed to be dead still, and there was very little movement. Slowly, people began to stir. The wafting scent of baking bread began to fill the streets, and Genin darted around the village carrying bottles of milk, newspapers and other assorted goods, ready for an early morning delivery. Within the tallest building in the village, a young, 13-year-old boy's eyes snapped open at exactly 6 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. His hand flew out and he slapped the alarm clock on his bedside table a mere 2 seconds before it would have went off. Naruto blinked away the sleep from his eyes and took a deep breath, his froggy sleeping hat bobbing up and down with every breath. He got out of bed, flannel pajamas wrinkled, and absently pressed a thumb on the spiraling red tattoo on his upper arm. A minuscule surge of chakra spread through the seal and Naruto was enveloped in a puff of smoke. When it disappeared, Naruto's pajamas were gone. He wore a light gray armored vest and long, dark pants. A pair of dull metal arm guards covered his forearm, and fingerless gloves protected his hands. His right upper arm was bare, his Anbu tattoo visible for the world to see, but he had wrapped a series of bandages around his upper left arm. Naruto rubbed his eyes and quickly made his bed, his movements automatic and well rehearsed. Then, making sure his mask was clipped onto his utility belt, he left his small bedroom with the door closing quietly behind him. It was usually Naruto's job to rouse the third Hokage, but today, like many mornings, the old man was already up. Naruto shook his head wryly as he closed the door to the Hokage's bedroom. Ever since Naruto had been promoted to Jonin, Sarutobi had been giving him less and less of a hard time. That's not to say that the young Anbu could drop his guard, for that would just ensure that the cranky old man would hurl something heavy at his face, but it had made the mornings much easier. Naruto grimaced, however, as he made his way to his next destination. If Sarutobi had lightened up, then Konohamaru had more than made up for it with his antics. Naruto didn't know if the young Sarutobi was secretly bitter about his promotion, or that he was still recovering from his loss at the Chunin exams. Maybe he was just trying and succeeding at being a pain in the ass. Whatever the reason, every morning was quickly becoming less of a wake-up call and more of a reenactment of the Third Great War. As such, when Naruto ascended the next floor to where Konohamaru's bedroom was, he was immediately wary and alert. Konohamaru was becoming a sneaky little bastard, and it would be a massive dent in his pride as a Jonin if a Genin got the upper hand on him in an ambush. Naruto clenched his fists. That bastard Kakashi would never let him live it down. The first trap was obvious. Ninja wire glinted across the hallway, leading up into the darkened corners of the hallway to bundles of packaged items. There could have been anything in there, from kunai or shuriken to poisons and gas. Knowing Konohamaru, it was probably something embarrassing and completely inappropriate for use in a real battle. It was simple and effective, yet not impossible to bypass without setting any of them off. Actually, there were several blind spots where an agile shinobi could dart through to reach the end of the corridor, and Naruto frowned at that. Konohamaru was smarter than that. Yet there was nothing obvious from where he was standing that could indicate danger. Naruto palmed his forehead, already thinking of the headache that was coming along. It was too early to be dealing with his kind of nonsense. Usually, the blonde Anbu would play along with Konohamaru, secretly pleased at how the young Sarutobi was progressing with his trap making. There were some days, however, when he just could be bothered. This was one of these days. He flipped through a series of hand seals and gathered the chakra. It pulsed in his veins, and the tenketsu in his mouth burned with a sudden warmth. Water release. Waterfall technique. He reared his head back and spat out a goblet of water. Chakra surged through it, and even as it began to leave his mouth it began to expand, more and more chakra-induced water coming forward until it had become a wild river. It swept across the hallway, tearing through the wires and traps and setting them all off. Puffs of white powder and a few pops of firecrackers going off were swept through by the tide, which slammed into the door at the end of the room with a thud. There was a sudden yelp and Naruto lowered his hands, even as the water began to recede and evaporate at an alarming rate. Chakra-induced water rarely lasted more than a few moments before the power that held the oxygen and hydrogen atoms together would dissipate. "I know you can hear me," Naruto called across the suddenly wet hallway, wisps of water rising up into mist around him. "You've got 5 minutes, or else I'm coming in there, tying you up in your underwear and dropping you off in Sakura's bedroom." Naruto could practically hear Konohamaru gulp as he turned away, a slight smirk on his face. An hour later, Naruto and the rest of Team Sigma accompanied the Hokage to the mission assignment office. This was where the majority of missions were handed out to shinobi teams, and where clients would come to request the services of Konoha. Usually manned by Chunin, the third Hokage liked to attend every now and then to give out missions, interact with his shinobi and make a grand impression on the clientele. Business had picked up after the Chunin exams, and Naruto would often restrain the urge to squirm as the clients, most often the lords and ladies of the fire court, would eye him with intrigue as he stood by the Hokage's side. As Team Sigma was officially responsible for the protection of the Hokage, they too had to accompany him. Unlike Naruto, however, they were merely allowed to stand around looking impressive, and impressive they must have looked, because the blatant appearance of so many Anbu had quite a few of the clients impressed. 2 children accompanying a hardened, leather-skinned man wearing a blacksmith's apron even ran up to Yuka, giggling as they circled her, waving and trying to get her attention. To her credit, the Yamanaka stood there stoically, although Naruto would bet that she was smiling behind her mask. Naruto, on the other hand, was running around almost constantly as he shuffled piles of paperwork from one corner of the room to the other, organized messengers to reach various departments and shinobi, collected payment and signed off on treasury deposits, fetched tea for the clients and the Hokage, and 1,000 other miscellaneous jobs. The mission assignment office seemed to be understaffed for the day, with 2 Chunin calling in sick, and ironically the missions assignment office hadn't made adjustments for the mission assignment office roster, probably because the one who organized the shift work was one of the Chunin who was off sick. It hurt Naruto's head to even think about it, but he never really got enough time to think too deeply as one job led to another. At one point, he tried to call up some shadow clones, but Sarutobi dispelled them with a single hand seal and whacked Naruto over the head, looking cross. "No clones," he barked grumpily. "Some of that paperwork has to have an authentic signature, and the fire courts say that the signatures of clones don't count. What about all of the other jobs?" Naruto had protested desperately. "Shut up and get to work." Naruto grumbled but got to work, and the shinobi and clients in the mission assignment office that morning got to witness the right hand of God himself sign forms in triplicate, bring tea to the Hokage, and generally run around looking flustered and annoyed. Team Sigma seemed to regard it as highly amusing, and at one point Naruto was sure that he heard Sasuke snort with laughter as he was forced to pick up a bundle of paperwork that the Hokage had dropped. "Traitor," Naruto muttered sourly. It looked like it was going to be one of those days, but at around noon a messenger arrived bearing a scroll with a red string. The Hokage immediately took it, opened it up and began reading, even as Naruto directed newly arriving clients to the Chunin manning the desks. There was a slight murmur of business in the air, but it faded away as the Hokage abruptly stood up, still reading the scroll. Team Sigma straightened, Toa and Komaki revealing themselves in the dark corners of the roof, as the third Hokage rolled the scroll back up and began to stride away. Team, escort mission priority, Naruto signed, and then waved off the last few clients so he could hurry on after his leader. 5 minutes later, Team Sigma and the third Hokage stood in the darkened depths of Konoha. Located underneath the great, prosperous village was her Department of Intelligence. It was essentially a giant dome crisscrossing with metal railing, wire and cables. At the very center of the dome was a large, rectangular table where an enormous map of the elemental countries had been laid. Small figurines, numbering in the dozens, had been put onto the map, each representing armies of the great village's respective armies. Most pieces were made of iron, but a few stood out with gleaming gold. Each of those pieces represented a single person, an S-rank shinobi, and there were no more than 10 of them on the map. The only other color visibly apparent was red, and each of those 9 markers represented a Jinchuriki. Above the map, with walls and floors made of transparent glass, was the office of the Jonin commander and head of the Department of Intelligence. Sarutobi was striding towards there now, flanked by Team Sigma, and shinobi, clerks and analysts practically jumped out of his way, looking up from benches of scrolls and reports to watch their leader walk past. Naruto walked behind Sarutobi at his right, mask on and black cloak flaring around him, and kept up with the old man as he ascended the staircase and paused before Nara Shikaku's office. Naruto, come, Sarutobi commanded. Naruto nodded. Yes, Hokage-sama. They entered the room, and the scarred man was obviously waiting for them, his eyes on them in a second. He sat behind a desk, his chin resting upon his clasped hands and a spread of open scrolls and loose paper scattered around him. The Jonin commander nodded respectfully at the third Hokage and rose. The Hokage sat down and Naruto stood behind him, while Shikaku made a single hand seal. The shadows from the room seemed to elongate and pulse, and they oozed over the glass floor and walls, covering them with a film of darkness that allowed the 2 senior-ranking members of the village their privacy. Are you certain? Sarutobi asked firmly, looking carefully at his Jonin commander. Are you absolutely certain? Shikaku gave a lazy shrug. As certain as I can be, he responded. He yawned as he passed over several loose pieces of paper. The Hokage read them carefully as the spiky-haired man continued. Our informants have revealed that we have evidence of financial transaction, traveling logs that match with assumed enemy movements and, most recently, that picture. Naruto wasn't able to look past the Hokage's shoulder at the photo, but the old man's shoulders tensed and he let out a weary groan that revealed more of his age than it probably should have. I see, Sarutobi murmured. He passed the documents back to Shikaku, who took them and placed them in a file. What have you received from the Fire Court? The Fire Lord has given you broad discretionary powers in this matter, Shikaku answered. A twitch of a wry smile crossed his face. In fact, you are to handle things as you see fit. However, should something occur, he will of course have full plausible deniability. Naturally, Sarutobi responded. Very well. I shall see to it immediately. He turned and clicked his fingers. Naruto felt his tattoo burn and in a flicker of movement, the door opened and the remainder of Team Sigma knelt before the Hokage. Naruto moved past them, closing the door, and turned to face his leader. The black shadows continued to shield the room from view, and the only light came from the bright fluorescence above them. Rise, the Hokage said. Team Sigma stood at attention as the Hokage began to brief them. I have a sensitive matter that I need you to attend to, the Hokage said. He clasped his hands together as Nara Shikaku continued to shuffle papers in the background. There is a nobleman fairly high placed within the Fire Court who we suspect may be meeting or colluding with foreign agents. We would like to talk to him. However, this man is not one you can simply snatch from his home, Shikaku added warningly. Were he to mysteriously disappear, it would cause problems, especially since our suspicions are just that. He handed Naruto a scroll with a golden ribbon and the personal chakra-embedded seal of the Fire Lord. On behalf of the Fire Lord and the third Hokage, you are to find this man in a public venue and, in full view of witnesses, you are to ask him to accompany you to Konoha. What if he refuses? Naruto asked quietly. Sarutobi and Shikaku exchanged glances. Make it clear to him that this is a direct command from the Fire Lord himself, Sarutobi said. The scroll shall provide your proof. If he continues to refuse, you may arrest him, but make sure that you do it publicly. This is not a matter that we can sweep under the rug. Our target is a senior member of the 24 Torches, and he wields some serious political clout. The village cannot appear to be in the wrong. Do you understand? Yes, Hokage-sama. Naruto bowed his head. Dismissed. Team Sigma, the Hokage commanded, and go and retrieve our traitor. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Team Sigma left Konoha on their priority mission. They had all stocked up on their equipment and had been given full access to the Anbu armory to take whatever it was that they needed. Team Sigma had only encountered the enemy Black Ops agents once, but they had left a very nasty impression on them. Naruto knew that, overall, the other Anbu team was more skilled than his own. Although lesser in number, they were probably all a rank jonin, heavily specialized and skilled in their fields and having more than a little power behind them. Team Sigma had managed to escape from them, but the other team hadn't bothered to pursue them for very long, and they hadn't been bogged down with a possibly reluctant or hostile client. If the allegations were true, it wasn't unlikely that the Black Ops team might decide to remove a loose end and take out the package before he had a chance to supply Konoha with information. Kage, Daichi, Sasuke were at the front of their formation, their abilities and bloodlines enabling them to spot and fend off any initial ambush of attack. Komaki and Toa held the middle, their skills lying primarily with mid-range combat, while Yuka and Naruto held the back, the two more suited for long-range combat with Genjutsu and Ninjutsu respectively. Luckily, they encountered no resistance as they bounded across the tree line towards the fire capital. The goal was the family estate of Kinjo Takahiro, one of the Fire Lord's senior advisors, a member of the 24 Torches, a celebrated judge of the tribunal, and head of the Kinjo banking establishment, the largest banking guild within the Land of Fire. At 50 years of age, the man managed to juggle his multiple roles well, and he was an influential and well-respected member of the Fire Court as well as a suspected traitor. One of the most respected men in the Land of Fire might be a traitor. It boggled the mind. It only took a couple of hours to arrive as the Kinjo family estate, although it soon became apparent that estate wasn't necessarily accurate. Instead, it was more like a moderately sized town. The presence of the headquarters of the Kinjo banking establishment had caused a small village to spring around it, and Naruto could see newly built roads stretching out from all directions, bringing with it the merchants, the traders and the money. The building itself was made of glass and iron, a modern design that stretched up higher than any other building around it. It was almost as large as the Hokage's tower back in Konoha, and it gleamed underneath the light of the sun. It was unlike any design that Naruto had seen before. Why waste good metal on a building when there was enough wood in the Land of Fire to build 1,000 buildings of that size and not even put a dent in lumber supplies? And all that glass, how could anybody expect any level of privacy? Team Sigma paused at the crest of the hill, staring down at the town beneath them. It was busy, and the faint sounds and aromas of a town drifted up towards them, of 1,000 different people speaking all at the same time, of the hollers and shouts of the merchants who had come to peddle their wares, of the smell of produce and smoke and livestock. What an interesting town, Toa whistled, rubbing the back of his head and sounding impressed. A land of rain design, Kage informed them quietly. He nodded at the bank. In the village hidden in rain, these are meant to rise as high as the clouds, great buildings of steel and glass. We can ask him about his architectural designs later, Naruto intruded firmly. He gestured at the town. We have our mission. We need to locate and apprehend Kinjo Takahiro. The Anbu around him nodded. They approached the town rather obviously, and they had no intention to sneak their way in. The Hokage had been quite specific and had stressed the importance of this not looking like a kidnapping if they could possibly help it. So when entering the town, Team Sigma simply walked in. There were no walls, there very rarely were in towns like these. Walls would do nothing to stop an attack by shinobi, who could simply walk over them at their leisure, and the assigned shinobi to this town would be able to keep any overt criminal activity at bay. All walls would create congestion and impede the flow of merchants, traders and clients coming to and from the town. Naturally, the presence of an Anbu squad entering the town caused a stir. The locals crossed the street, gazing at them warily. Men became stony-faced and women ushered away small children. The traders and merchants gave them a wide berth, and the many of them who had hired a shinobi escort spoke quietly to them. Naruto caught glimpse of no less than 20 foreign shinobi in the town, and the headbands of all of the other major villages except Kiri were represented. 8 shinobi from Iwa, 5 shinobi from Kumo, 12 shinobi from Suna, 14 shinobi from assorted minor villages, 500 meters radius, Daichi signed. Naruto didn't give any indication that he had received the information, but he kept his eyes about. Unlike the rest of his squad, he wore his face unmasked, his whiskered cheeks, blue eyes and blonde, spiky hair bare for the world to see. Part of the mission documents had specified that Naruto was to make a public appearance, perhaps to play on his increasingly popular reputation with the civilian populace. He had, after all, led the team that had destroyed the Sky Country invasion force, and he had rescued the daughter of the Fire Lord. Such acts tended to get around, and even as many of his squad received wary and even hostile glances as they entered the town, many looked at Naruto with looks of dawning comprehension and a somewhat measure of respect. It made Naruto uncomfortable, to be honest. Long ago, before he had graduated from the academy, Naruto had longed for recognition. Now, after 7 years of service in Anbu, it was all rather uncomfortable. He had received his validation from the third Hokage, and what the rest of the population on the planet thought of him didn't matter to him at all. Nonetheless, he would play on it. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a sheet of paper, a timetable of events that Kinjo Takahiro should be attending courtesy of their local informants. It was almost 4:30, so the noble should be in the auction hall, along with many other members of the nobility and the guards. Public enough for what they need to do. The young blonde clicked his fingers and, using the map provided, strode towards the small building where the auction was being held. This building again was rather different from traditional Fire Country architecture. Instead of wooden planks, this building was made entirely out of polished stone. Dark black marble gleamed in the sun as the temple-like building appeared in view. It was contrasted rather nicely by a series of giant white marble pillars that held up the awnings. Carriages, servants and messengers mingled at the entrance of the hall, and they parted as Naruto led his squad through. Team Sigma moved behind him, flanking him, as Naruto entered the building, pausing only to show his headband to the local security. Inside, the polished white floors stretched onward throughout the cavernous entrance hall. In front of them was a set of doors, polished wood and stained glass hiding what was behind them. Naruto walked forward, his footsteps echoing loudly in the deserted hall, opened the doors and slipped into the next room. The building opened up into a rather large room with rows of chairs lining both sides of a center aisle. The rows were packed with men and women dressed in the fine clothes of the nobility from their respective nations. Loose, silky robes adorned those from the land of wind, large, fur-covered coats draped over the lords from the land of earth, while those from the land of lightning wore fine woven robes with elaborate scenes of battle and victory sewn into them. Behind and around these lords stood the personal attendants and guards, and many of them were shinobi. Naruto saw more than one shinobi glance at them warily, their foreign headbands glinting underneath the lights of the room, but he ignored them. At the very front of the room was his target, Kinjo Takahiro. He strode forward, past the lords and ladies, the guards and servants, and moving past the faltering and astonished auctioneer, to where Lord Kinjo sat at the table to the side. He watched them come with calm eyes, flanked by a pair of Iwa nin. The fact that such an important and revered member of the Fire Court had chosen to hire shinobi from a village other Konoha was significant. Kinjo Takahiro, Naruto asked the man as he stopped at the front of his table. The man behind the table angled his head in confirmation. He wore thin-rimmed glasses over a pair of sharp, calculating eyes, and his dark hair was streaked with gray. His girth was larger than average, and he wore the fine yellow and red robes of the Fire Court. His hands were adorned with rings, brilliant jewels flashing, and traditional cane rested upon the edge of the table. "Your Konoha's Anbu," Takahiro said, sounding completely unsurprised. Indeed, he even sounded a tad derisive, a brave position to be when confronted by the Hokage's personal guard. "Are you here to whisk me away?" He smiled faintly. "Am I about to disappear, never to be seen again, just like all of Sarutobi's enemies are?" "No, sir," Naruto answered quietly. He reached into his robes and pulled out the scroll with the golden ribbon. "I believe that this will explain everything." Takahiro took the scroll and looked at the emblem of the Fire Lord with a faint grimace. He carefully untied it and broke the seal with a loud crack that echoed in the suddenly silent room. The two Iwa nin behind him were shot furtive glances at each other and carefully adjusted their stance. Behind him, Naruto could feel his team do the same thing. It was a bad match-up for the Iwanin. Both were Jonin, as indicated by their vests, and Naruto was pretty sure that the woman on the right with the blonde bangs was listed in the bingo book as an A-rank shinobi. Nonetheless, it didn't change the fact that it was 2-on-7. I see, Takahiro said quietly as he finished reading the scroll. His fingers clenched. So the Fire Lord has seen fit to throw me away, after everything I have done to secure his empire. He and Sarutobi are truly magnificent together. As far as I'm aware, sir, we need you to come and answer some questions on a matter that you might be able to help with, Naruto responded crisply. Due to the delicacy of the matter, we need to do this in Konoha, where it's safe and secure. We're here to make sure that you reach Konoha without incident. Every courtesy is to be afforded to you where possible. Takario smiled faintly and regarded Naruto carefully. Uruzumaki Naruto, he said. He shook his head. Such a powerful shinobi, on such a trivial mission. If it was trivial, I wouldn't be here, Naruto interjected firmly. Now, sir, you're allowed to pack a bag or two, but we need to leave shortly. For your own protection, my team will escort you from here on. He eyed the Iwanin. Unfortunately, your mission has been cancelled early. That's not part of our contract, the large man rumbled. He was big, rivaling the size of an akamaiki, but with hard, bulky muscle instead of fat. He had a strange look on his face, as if he was still trying to process what he had just heard, but Naruto didn't miss the flash of intelligence in his eyes. What do you say, Suki? The woman beside him said nothing, but she brushed the blonde bangs out of her eyes, regarding the Anbu team carefully. She wore a vest that left her arms completely bare, save for the bandage wrapped around her right forearm. Now that Naruto had a name for the woman, the rest of the bingo book entry came to him easily. Nanashi Suki, a rank jonin from Iwagakure. Strong areas include taijutsu and explosives. Affinity to wine techniques, and when combined with her explosives, become quite dangerous. Recommended strategy: cage take point and keep her occupied. Daichi and Sasuke back cage up to supply intel on hidden explosives. Partner dangerous in close combat. Toa engages Yuka and Komaki move in for lethal blows. Dispatch guards, detain mission priority and retrieve any significant. The woman's voice broke Naruto out of his quick thoughts. Nah, we're done here, she drawled. She shrugged at Takario. The contract would have specified that we're not allowed to engage any of the local authorities in the course of the duties. Standard legal crap. If these Anbu are here on the orders of the Fire Lord, we can't stop them. She eyed them, then snorted, shrugged and began to walk away. See ya later, spooks, she waved them off, her voice a sing-song. The huge shinobi lumbered obediently behind her as the two Iwanin left the auction house. Takario was now alone, and he appeared resigned to his situation. Very well, he said primly and stood. I shall gather some belongings and we will depart to Konoha. Lord Nakeshi, if you would attend to matters here then I would be most appreciative. The auctioneer nodded, his eyes still wide, as Lord Kinjo stood up with the poise and dignity of a man of the noble class. Then, as if he wasn't surrounded by battle-hardened Anbu, he strode from the room with his head held high, flanked by the rest of Team Sigma. Naruto remained where he was as the man left the room, bending down to pick up the discarded mission orders from the Fire Lord. Then, he too left the room, and only then did the buzz and murmur of conversation begin once more. For a man that only had to pack a bag, Kinjo Takario certainly took his time. Then again, Naruto was unused to the clothing habits of the nobility, and after seeing how the Lord had filled an entire suitcase with only 2 nights' clothing, he wasn't quite sure if Takario was trying to delay them or was trying to bide time for a rescue. Nonetheless, the letter from the Fire Lord had specifically said, with all available courtesy, and Naruto wasn't quite sure if hurrying the man to finish packing up would be discourteous. After all, some nobles still fought each other on the dueling court over perceived slights, real or not. Was Takario one of those types? Still, after 10 minutes had gone by, enough was enough. Naruto cleared his throat quite abruptly and Takario looked up from his third suitcase, a faint look of annoyance. Sir, I'm sure you won't be needed in Konoha for very long, Naruto said delicately. And if you are, I'm sure some suitable clothing can be provided for you. I think, though, that it's time to leave. Very well, Takario huffed. Next to him, his wife, 20 years younger than he and wearing heavy makeup, made crooning noises of distress as Takario shut the suitcase. Sasuke moved forward and carefully sealed the belongings away in a scroll, tucking it back into his cloak. Takario's face softened as he turned to regard his wife, and he took her by the hands. "I'll be back soon," he murmured, seemingly not caring that the Anbu agents were watching. "Give the children my love, and don't forget to water the bonsai." The wife made incomprehensible babbling noises and collapsed to the ground in a teary heap. Takario adjusted his robes and turned back to Naruto, giving him a curt nod. Naruto bowed his head and gestured for Takario to leave. Together, Takario and Team Sigma walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs. Behind them came the over-exaggerated wails of his wife, her crooning pitch rising and falling, as if her husband had just passed away. It was quite an uncomfortable noise to listen to, but it was much better than what awaited them outside. They stepped out of the large home and into the large gardens to meet a crowd of angry men and women waiting for them. They shouted things at them, hollering incoherently, even as the military police held them back. Naruto was taken aback, and glanced at Takario only to see that the noble was not surprised at all. Either the noble was very well loved, or the rot of treason had spread throughout this village, because the crowd before them had no love for Konoha. He saw several signs, many of them large posters of a demonically drawn Sarutobi, and had to clench his fists to keep his face stony still. Nonetheless, the protesters parted before them. It was only a small group, perhaps 20 or 30 of them, but as they walked through the center of town it became apparent that things were getting worse. Shouts and hollers were filling the air, far different from the merchants and traders, coming from several streets over. Around them, several shops were closing the doors and windows and locking up. A merchant hurriedly covered his goods, gathered his earnings for the day and made for the nearest shelter. Naruto could feel the unease in the pit of his stomach, and he eyed the rooftop speculatively. He was supposed to leave the Kinjo family holding as he had come in, showing to the world that the Anbu had nothing to hide, but the worsening situation was making him seriously consider breaking the mission protocol. The decision was ultimately taken out of his hands. Team Sigma, Takario walking in the middle of them, turned the corner which away from Takario's estate and onto the main road. They could see a sizable crowd up ahead. This time, however, they were being held back by 4 black-cloaked and masked Anbu, each wearing a headband with a leaf insignia inscribed upon it. Daichi stopped short at the sight of them, fingers moving rapidly. Approaching shinobi undetected on Byakugan, suspect genjutsu interference. Naruto stopped short and held up his hand, his heart racing. Team Sigma followed suit as Naruto sent a careful pulse of chakra through his Anbu tattoo and set resulting chakra pulse down upon the other Anbu. There was no response. Then, before Naruto could do a single thing, the lead Anbu turned back to the crowd, casually reached into their cloak and thrust a glinting steel blade deep in the stomach of the nearest civilian. There was a stunned silence from the crowd as the man collapsed. Naruto's eyes were wide and his fingers darted, giving out orders to his squad as the fake Anbu agent turned around, flanked by 3 of his colleagues. An instant later, there was a deafening clap of thunder and a flash of searing heat enveloped the street. Men and women screamed as the technique tore through them rather messily, arcs of lighting shredding clothing, scorching skin and boiling blood. Even as the protesters fell screaming, Naruto absently noted that most of the injuries were far more dramatic than they appeared, which he supposed was the point. Daichi, Komaki, Sasuke, secure package, meet at rendezvous Alpha 3, Cage, Toa, Yuka and I will intercept enemy. The orders were received in a flash and Komaki grabbed Takario's arm. She instantly disappeared with a flicker of movement, Daichi and Sasuke following her. Komaki was a Jonin with command experience and would see the mission through regardless of what happened to the rest of them. Daichi had his Byakugan, which could hopefully allow him to avoid enemy ambushes, and Sasuke was not at the level where he could be fighting opponents at a caliber such as these. There was no doubt in Naruto's mind. These were members from the same Black Ops team that they had encountered at Minoru's home, the same team that had ambushed and almost defeated them. It was not going to happen again. As civilians and protesters scrambled back and began to run away, Naruto darted ahead with incredible speed, only outdone by Cage who was a step ahead of him, black blade blurring in the air. It clashes against the bloodied steel sword of the lead operative, sparks flickering through the air, but then Naruto lost vision as he approached his own target. It was a slender operative, definitely a woman behind those robes, and she turned to meet his charge with a ferocity that almost overwhelmed him. Her hand-to-hand strikes were vicious and unrelenting, and drove him back the way he had come in the first few seconds. She was a never-ending whirlwind of movement, hands, feet, elbows and legs swinging at him from all angles as she twirled on her feet, one large swinging movement leading into another until it became a momentum that Naruto weathered with a grimace. He blocked a kick, and her leather-soled boot slammed down on his forearms with a loud crack as the steel cap hidden in the heel slammed against the metal plate of his armguard. This led to an elbow jab that Naruto hastily parried, but it left him open to a quick jab and he only managed to stop his nose from breaking by rolling with the blow. Nonetheless, he had drawn the operative away from the crowds, who were running the other way, and jumped back to avoid a whirlwind roundhouse kick. He flipped through 3 hand seals, heart beating madly in his chest. Earth release, rising stone spears. The woman threw herself to the side in a neat roll as the cobbled stones beneath her shifted and cracked, and a series of large, rocky spikes burst out from the ground in an attempt to skewer them. As she came out of the roll, Naruto made 2 more hand seals and gestured at her, and the rocky spear's shot broke from the ground and shot towards her at great speed. Her own hands flashed and her cheeks bulged. A thin stream of high-pressurized water spat from her mouth, zipping through the air and destroying many of the flying spears in an instant. What she didn't destroy, she dodged, and then reared her head back and spat her water technique out at him. Naruto's eyes widened and he let out a strangled gasp as the water technique caught him in the chest and cleaved him in 2, surging past him to strike a nearby cart of produce and bisect that as well. The woman jumped back as Naruto suddenly exploded in a puff of smoke, clearly not fooled. From his vantage point on the rooftops, Naruto hurled a fistful of shuriken into the sky. They arced up and began to fall down, to which he made a hand seal and focused his chakra. Shuriken shadow clone technique. The handful of shuriken blurred and became 1,000, and they slammed into the ground in a devastating clatter. The woman was torn to shreds as she was enveloped, jerking back and collapsing to the ground. Naruto wasn't fooled at all, his eyes hard and his face grim as the sound of chains rattled in his ears, and it came to no surprise to him when a flicker of movement caught the corner of his eye. He turned in a flash, head rearing back, and spat out a mouthful of glowing flame, and the broken, wooden remains of the cart from the street was torn asunder, shredded by the terrible white flame. Behind it, however, the woman continued her charge, holding a slim, rapier-like sword, and she thrust it into his chest. The shadow clone of Uzumaki Naruto didn't even get a chance to look surprised as it exploded in a puff of smoke, and the real Naruto made a single hand seal as he gestured to the rooftop on the other side of the street. Detonate. Half a reel of grade 2 explosive tags sizzled and went off in a fiery ball of flame that rose up into the air. The windows and wooden houses around them rumbled, but Naruto had positioned the tags away from the street and into the air, and apart from the flaming ruins of the shop roof, there seemed to be no collateral damage. The smoke rose into the air, hiding the remains of his enemy from view. Wind release. Great breakthrough. A gust of wind tore from Naruto's outstretched palms and blew the smoke away, revealing a sphere of water falling to the ground. The woman underneath looked a little singed, and smoke curdled from the bottom of her black robe. From behind her cracked mask, Naruto could tell she was glaring at him, and he felt a little tingle of grim satisfaction as he noticed that her stolen headband had been destroyed in the blast, revealing a short cut of dark hair. There was a flash of light and a series of high-pitched whines, and Naruto could see Toa fending off an attack, his arm glowing scarlet with runes as he formed a makeshift crossbow in his hand and shot a series of blasts of red power at his opponent. Cage and the operative with the bloodied sword had disappeared between the alleys, 2 dark streaks fighting in the narrow space, metal clashing upon metal in a shower of sparks, while Yuka danced out of her opponent's reach, hurling kunai, shuriken and the occasional genjutsu to disorient and confuse. The female operative on the other side of the street cocked her head at the sound of some unknown signal and made a single hand seal. Naruto flipped through his own hand seals at the same time, but he was too late to stop her. Even as a side of wind blasted from his hands at waist level, explosions rocked several parts of the town and giant plumes of black smoke rose into the air. Naruto's next technique, a series of blazing streaks of fire, soared far above the girl as she chose to bend backwards at the waist instead of jump over the technique. Then, she threw a series of smoke bombs down, as did the rest of her teammates, and disappeared from sight. By the time the smoke had cleared, the enemy operatives were gone. All that was left behind was the devastated and destroyed street, with flames and smoke rising in the distance, along with the fallen, screaming bodies of the civilians, the approaching military police and the shuriken and kunai that were embedded in the walls and cobbled streets. The fight had been over in 30 seconds. Shit, Naruto growled. He jumped from the rooftop and landed on the ground, his eyes raking the streets. Many of the protesters that had been struck with the powerful lightning technique had gone still. Naruto absently rubbed his hand through his hair, his heart racing and the surging emotions of revulsion and self-disgust threatening to overwhelm him. Shit. The enemy operatives had done it again. They had taken the guise of Leaf Nin, hacked apart the protesters, inflamed the situation and escaped without capture, and all on Naruto's watch. It had happened again. While he stood there, Toa and Yuka had taken off their masks and they were tending to the fallen civilians. Cage appeared from the alleyway, a vertical cut in his mask, but his black machete-like blade gleamed with fresh blood and he gave off a quiet air of satisfaction. Hopefully the wound had been significant. Naruto would have been happy to stand there in his fit of self-deprecation, but a gurgling noise caught his attention and he turned. His eyes widened as he saw a young girl pinned to the wall by one of the slim, steel blades that the operatives had been carrying. He ran towards her, darting over the fallen produce and broken glass, and examined her. She was a young thing, maybe 6 or 7, with curly dark hair and dimples. Her face was pale and tears streaked down her cheeks, and Naruto looked down to examine the blade. It had been lodged in her chest in such a way to avoid an immediate kill, but the rapidly expanding pool of blood beneath her feet meant that she was quickly bleeding to death. Naruto grasped the hilt of the sword and carefully slid it from the girl's chest. It left with a squelching noise, and the young Anbu tossed it away with disgust, catching the girl as she fell limply to the ground. The streets were alive with the sound of running footsteps, and shouts, screams and wails of terror and sorrow. Amid all of that, Naruto worked frantically to try and save the girl's life. He failed. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.